That's not okay. We don't use that type of language here. I'm not forcing them to apologize. I'm not forcing them to repeat themselves, but I'm addressing it in that moment.
You feel like, oh, I'm being the bad guy now. But it's important that you understand you're creating a culture. You're not being a bad guy by addressing those things.
This is First Class Counselors, another innovative podcast brought to you by Camp Hacker. First Class Counselors is dedicated to young and up-and-coming camp mavericks. By equipping and empowering our on-the-ground staff, camp directors can rest easy knowing that our campers are having the true life-changing experience that parents expect. Find our show notes and our blog for camp leaders and professionals at camphacker.tv.
AM Skyer is a leading insurance and strategic partner for many of the finest camps in America. AM Skyer partners with camps to provide public relations, legal, medical, behavioral support, and more. Experience the AM Skyer difference. Learn more at amskyer.com.
Welcome to First Class Counselors, where we give camp counselors insider tips and advice on how to make a camper summer the best it can be.
And whether you are brand new to the camp world or you've roasted a couple s'mores before, self-improvement and a growth mindset is built into the DNA of every great staff member, or dare we say it, every great first-class counselor.
My name is Oliver Gregan. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the Director of Camping Services for YMCA Camp Westwood with the Pawtucket YMCA located in Coventry, Rhode Island. We are a rebuilding day camp that plans to introduce overnight camp. And excitingly, we're looking to do it in 2026. So the wheels are moving.
Amazing. I can't wait to hear more about it, Oliver. My name's Matt Wilfred. Pronouns are he, him, and I'm the executive producer of podcasting and a consultant with the Go Camp Pro team.
Yeah. And let's talk about today's topic. I think one of the hardest things that camp counselors have to deal with is inappropriate language. When the camper says the wrong thing. Once upon a time, parents would just throw soap in a kid's mouth, right? But unfortunately, that is not something that you as a staff member can use as a tool. So please keep all soap out of campers' mouths. But a lot of times a counselor will just say something along the like, hey, you shouldn't say that. Or they kind of let it roll off and we move on instead of addressing what was actually said. But some of these things can be really inappropriate at times and they need to be addressed. So whether that language is insensitive, it's inappropriate, it's definitely one of those things that we know are not acceptable conversation topics, or maybe it's bullying. It has to be addressed. So today we're going to be talking about how to handle inappropriate language with campers.
Right. And remember that your job as a camp counselor is to be the front line of defense. And maybe this is dramatic, but I truly believe it is that camp should be a welcoming, inclusive space for kids. They deal with a lot of crap in their non-camp lives when it comes to like online bullying or inappropriateness. And that camp, it's not meant to be like a safe space where they're like protected from all of those things, but it is meant to be a place where people are welcoming, where they're inclusive, and where we have this community that we want to protect. So your job as the counselor is to be that first line of defense and know when it's time to lean on some other supports. And this is definitely going to be a two-parter episode because we can't cover everything. And, Oliver and I, we're seasoned camp professionals, but we're not experts on the ins and outs of inclusivity. So we're going to get an expert in here to go for, when these conversations get a little more spicy or what they look like. But that being said, there are some baseline skills that every counselor should know on how to approach inappropriate conversations. So this episode, we're going to break down just a little bit of definitions of what inappropriate conversations might sound like and look like at camp. Then we'll talk about how to set yourself up for success to prevent it from even happening in the first place. But knowing that no matter how good you are at preventing, it's going to happen. How do you respond to that? So that'll be topic 3, how to respond to it. And then we'll break it down kind of the initial steps of when it's something that is very off base or very inappropriate. What are the first steps that you need to take as a counselor? Oliver, that's going to be a good episode. I'm excited.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that counselors have to deal with a lot, and a lot of times we don't feel like we have the tools to handle those things. Even myself as a director who's been doing this for a really long time, I might be in a group of kids and all of a sudden a kid just says something off the cuff and you're just like, whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And it has to get addressed. And it's really important for you to know that there has to be action taken a lot of the times, whether and we're going to kind of define a little bit of how campers say it, but whether it is a smaller comment or it is something that maybe is a bigger social issue, it does need to be addressed, and you can't just kind of let it roll away. So let's kind of define what sometimes campers say that you need to be aware of as a counselor, because the unfortunate truth is kids are coming from all different types of areas, and sometimes they're bringing this from home, sometimes they're bringing it from the TV shows or the media that they're getting from their phone, and sometimes they're getting it from other kids in whatever world that they might be coming from. Maybe it is acceptable this is a normal type of conversation in another group that child might be in, and they need to understand that maybe in this scenario at camp it's not an acceptable one, and it's really important for you guys. So the first one I would say is inappropriate. And this is sometimes sexual content of some nature, like maybe commenting on somebody else's body in an inappropriate way, but it's something that without a filter. This is really important on a secondary basis because this is also something that we see can be a sign of abuse. So campers who are more likely to say these types of things might be having something else that's going on. So noticing it, addressing it, and keeping it there in the back of your head of like, oh, is this becoming continuous, is actually really important for the overall safety of your camper. But also, it's just not something that should be happening in the cabin group. So
Right.
this does extend a little bit because, for a younger camper, the inappropriateness is just like, whoa, why is a 8-year-old talking about touching people's butts, right? Not really
Mhm.
appropriate. Then you get to like your 10, 11-year-old and they're doing it because they think it's cool, right? Like they might be commenting on something in an inappropriate way that has to get addressed, but they're doing it because they've seen others, maybe older kids or again in their media that addresses it in some way, or something is sexualized in a way that gets them noticing it. But then also, this is the one that kind of gets by a lot of the times, or a counselor might think is okay, because a a camper is going to be asking like, who are you dating? Oh, he's kind of cute, right? And now all of a sudden they're getting onto the looks, the appearance of a counselor or another camper, and they're sexualizing that person, and they're not really taking the time to treat them like a human. But then a lot
Yeah.
of times counselors will get caught in that conversation and say like, oh, like I want to be cool, or I need to give them something. I can give them a little bit so
Yeah.
that so we can get through this and get this conversation. And it's totally okay for you as a counselor to be like, hey, like my dating life is not part of our conversation today, and
Yeah.
having that tone. And we'll go a little bit more into how to address these things, but I want to kind of define them first. The next one that I want to say is insensitive. So this is saying something typically without tact. Like a lot of times you'll see this in younger campers where they just kind of go like, you're fat, or like, I don't think you're fast enough, right? They're making a comment that is degrading maybe to another person, or they're not really thinking about what the purpose behind it. Sometimes this can get a little bit confused with, I think, bullying. I usually say bullying is a little bit more intended. So like you are attempting to not include that person, you're attempting to hurt that person with your words, whereas sometimes this is a little bit less tactful and it's just something that's insensitive, right? And a lot of times maybe with a younger kid, it's just their observation and they don't realize that their observation is rude, right? So like, you're like, no, he's kind of dumb, I don't think he's going to understand what we're trying to do, right? You're in a team building exercise or something like that and you're debriefing, and there's that one kid who's not really holding back on, nope, Johnny really sucks at this. And you're like, I also, you can see me kind of giggling about this because a lot of times when this happens, it's when that kid says something that is an observation. Sometimes they say it in a really funny manner, and you kind of laugh about it, like on the inside, because like, it's kind of true, it was. But you as a counselor have to hold that in and go, whoa, like, not really where we're going with this. Let's refocus this conversation. And then I think with older kids, sometimes this is just becoming more blunt, right? There is a camper that is, not in the in crowd with the group. They're kind of subconsciously excommunicating this person from the group. They're like, he's just not part of it. He's not really finding his way. And instead of them being inclusive and having this person be part of the group and accepting them for who they are, it's just kind of like they just gotta say like, he's just not one of us. And, or she doesn't care about combing her hair or doing makeup. She wants to do something else. And in reality, that person wants to be part of that group. They want to be included, but unfortunately, this insensitive language is subconscious happening sometimes, but it's important for us to address it as well. The next one I want to talk about is bullying. This is, like I was saying before, much more, I think, direct. They are really attempting to kind of be exclusive or hurtful towards this person. They're taking the intention. One that I've seen in the past is like the older campers will make a list of, who they think is attractive or not attractive. I think it's ridiculous. That should never be
Yeah.
allowed.
Yeah.
Or like a like don't like list. I once found I had a cabin of girls who had put in a shoebox, and they were constantly updating it until we found out about it. The classic Mean Girls burn book, I think, is kind of what this is.
Yeah.
But this is intentional, right? Like, they know what they're doing. They know that it's hurtful. They're not doing anything to really stop it, and they're kind of having fun with that.
Right.
So obviously, it's a form of bullying, and there's other forms and other ways to go about it, but kind of some examples there.
Yeah.
And then the last one is kind of the non-acceptable one. This is when someone comes into the community that the language they use might be racist, it might be sexist, it might be insulting towards a religion or a belief. It's not human what they're doing. It's not being inclusive to our world. It's not trying to bring everybody together, and it's just not acceptable, right? And sometimes you get a kid who is coming from, maybe a community that is not as accepting, and they come into our camp world, which is meant to be quite inclusive, and they've lived in a world where these were acceptable things to say, or acceptable ways to talk about, or acceptable thoughts, and that has to get addressed. That's one situation. The others, they've taken on some form of media or something that has impacted the way that they're thinking. I recently was in a meeting with a lot of executive directors for camps, mostly in this New England region, but a huge part of our conversation was this kind of manosphere that's come in, especially with young boys, and how sometimes that social world online is affecting how young men are handling, what it means to be a man, how to take on those things. And it was a very interesting conversation to have with some pretty experienced camp directors and some of the things that they were handling. But at the end of the day, these are unacceptable things that sometimes are coming into the camp world, and they need to be directly addressed. And we'll talk about those too as we go through. But I really wanted to kind of categorize those, because as a counselor, it's really important for you, when you hear these things, to go, okay, what did I just hear? What category could this potentially be in? And why is that important? And what does that mean for that camper, that group, who I'm going to be communicating this with, right? And how to go about doing it. And note, like, I didn't really talk too much about swearing. I think that kind of falls under inappropriate content, but that might be something else you can deal with, where, you might have a kid who's learned a swear word, and it's become part of their language, and you have to address that as well. So
Right.
and the reason why I held that one off to last is that's where your brain is going to go first, right? As a counselor, is like, oh, how to deal with kids that are swearing. But in reality, like, that's one word. The more important thing for you as a counselor is to understand what's the topic of conversation, what's the world that you're in that's being communicated by this camper that has to get addressed. The one word, the F-bomb, because they, pinch their fingers real quick and they scream it, or they have somehow looped it into their conversation, I don't want to say is less important, but is a bit easier to address, because it's not going to make or break that child in society, in their growth and development. Whereas these topics, if these campers are continuously talking about it or not understanding what they're doing, you're not helping that camper in their growth and development, and they're going to go down a path where they are going to be inappropriate and insensitive and bully and hurt others, and believe in some really non-acceptable things as they grow up in life. So, and that's why holding it to last, not to say it's not important, you still got to address it, but it's not what my primary would be to address in today's podcast. So a lot of definition there, a lot of information.
Yeah, the context is important, right? And like, I think we're going to be talking a little bit more like about camper behavior this season. I think it's really important. And the one thing that sticks to me when I think about like behavior management or any of these things is remembering that all behavior is communication. All right, let me say that again. All behavior is communication. It's kids communicating what they need in that moment. And so it's very clear when someone slams the door on their hand and drops the F-bomb, they're communicating that they're in pain, right? And like, it's not the same thing as if someone says something non-inclusive or homophobic or racist towards another camper. You treat these things differently. And it's not about like, there's how you respond in the moment, which is what we're gonna do in this episode. We're really gonna talk about like in the moment. But I think it's the important context to have in your head is like, why are they doing this? What need are they expressing? What are they communicating by doing this? So First of all, just remembering that different cultures or people who are neurodivergent or, on the autism spectrum or have Asperger's express themselves in different ways that we might not be used to. So just first of all, calling that out, that it's important to give grace for those types of things. And we're never assuming in any case that a camper is a bad person. They've just done a thing that is not acceptable within the community that we've created. So hold that first. Second of all, what do they need? What do they need when they're doing these things? So it could be, are they looking for like status or power within the group? Maybe they feel insecure about their place. Are they angry? Are they frustrated? Are they tired? Are they lonely? What underlying needs are coming from this? And a lot of the ways that you can help with this behavior in the long term is redirecting that need throughout the day. So making sure they have a place at the table, making sure that you're doing good team building to form bonds within your cabin. So they're forming friendships. There's a lot of ways that you can help that need, which will stem the behavior from happening in the long term. It doesn't mean that it's okay for them to communicate that way because they have that need. And that'll be my tip later on, is that it's okay to validate the feeling and still set the boundary of how we communicate with each other at camp. And the last thing I'll say here before we start getting a little more tactical is that we say this a lot on this podcast, is that it's important to know what the boundaries are at the camp that you work at, right? So what does your camp feel is like developmentally appropriate for kids to talk about, right? Like I worked at a medical camp for a couple of years, and them talking about their medical histories and their journeys is actually important for them to be able to do it in a space that is not completely regulated by adults. There's still what is in bounds and what is out of bounds, but there might be something that is appropriate for them. Or if they're coming in from I think it's called the manosphere, right? The Andrew Tate garbage that is out there, like I think there's a difference between shutting it down and providing a little bit of context and good leadership from a caring individual. But again, your camp, it might be more okay for you to be going down that road at camp. I think in general, it's not our job to further educate, like to be a subject matter expert on inclusivity and all of these things, but it is our job to maintain the community and set the boundaries about how we treat each other, right? So I think, Oliver, a good example, like we're not going to go into my dating life. I'm not going to tell you about my dating life, and I'm not going to talk about like sex or my experience in there, because that crosses a boundary, right? But what we can do is we can talk about, what's important in terms of how we're talking about consent, and just like everyday consent. Like, are we talking about somebody while we're there? Would this person be okay with the way that we're talking about them when they're not in the room, right? Body positive language, not focusing on looks. There's a lot of ways that we can kind of hold the cultural and community boundary without feeling like we have to completely change a camper's viewpoint. Because I think, Oliver, you said it quickly, but it's important. We don't know the realm where campers are coming from, right? Whether it be, super conservative, super liberal, campers are going to come from different areas. But what's important is how we treat each other here while we're at camp, and what is the effect that our language and actions are having on the community. And at the end of the day, that is what is important for that time that they're at camp. Because remember, kids are at camp for like 1 to 8 weeks in the summer, and then they have between whatever the math is there, 51 and 42 other weeks out in the big scary world. So I think do what we can and do what is within the boundaries of what your camp will allow.
Yeah, I think it's not so much language, but it's definitely a parenting thing that I see a lot of times is like at camp, obviously, like we physical, right, roughness, like hitting, punching, right, defending oneself in a physical manner is not allowed. And, I would say that's true for pretty much all camps. However, right, there's a parent's belief, right? Like, oh, well, if your kid does something to my kid has full permission to punch him in the face, right? Like
Right.
that's and it's understanding that, what a parent teaches at home versus what our culture is at camp, in a lot of categories is going to be different. And
Yep.
whatever your belief may be, it's an understanding of, hey, like I might come to this parent and say like, hey, your kid said this about this type of thing. And the parent is going to go, yeah, yep, that's what I teach him. That's what I want my kid to know. And
Right.
you may not share that belief. So it's really important to understand. And that, like we said, this is an episode for a whole nother category
Yeah.
of how you handle those two different cultures clashing. But there is a point where you can say like, hey, that's not something that's acceptable here at camp. We are not going to threaten somebody else, which I would put under that category of bullying, but we're not going to threaten
Mhm.
somebody else because we don't like who they are, what they've done, right? Like we need to be able to know that our hands stay to ourselves. And I would say threatening is definitely falling under that line of something that you need to address as a counselor.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about how we handle this before it even happens, right? Like what do we do to make sure? And I know we've talked about some different ways to monitor behavior, but language is definitely a behavior management area that we have to follow. And so a couple of those things that we can do. And I think it's starting off of addressing acceptable language in your cabin on that first day of camp, right? It's
Mhm.
sitting those kids down and saying like, hey, this is what's acceptable, this is what our culture is, this is what I'm looking for out of you guys. And I think creating that contract with the group so that it is very aware of like, hey, we talked about this on the first night. It gives you that piece of equipment later, that tool to come back to, that is going to make the difference when communicating to that child. Is like, hey, we as a group, we as a community do not believe that language that was used was okay, and we're going to address that. And then going through there. And then another thing is your language and topics must set an example as a counselor, right? We talked earlier about with like older kids and not talking about your relationships and such like that. But what are you talking about as a counselor as you are around the kids? And a lot of times I see with staff, they don't see what they're talking about is inappropriate because maybe they're not talking directly to the kids. Maybe they don't think the kids could hear them when they're talking to another staff member. But a lot of this might be like, oh, hey, I'm talking about what we're going to do this weekend or use, right? Like these things are inappropriate, or alcohol use, or things that you can do as a maybe a person who is of age, but talking about them in front of a kid and maybe are using them is probably something that I would say is inappropriate. So you need to make sure that you're doing that. The other thing I would say is like things like bluntness or like strict honesty, right? That's not fair to a child because you as an adult can take that. It's appropriate for you to do with another, 20-year-old, 25-year-old. We need to be able to talk to each other with some directness. However, you doing that to a child or you doing that to children is usually something that's not going to work out really well because they can't take that directness, that straightforward answer, because they haven't
Right.
been built to handle it yet. And something else that I think is really important is like sarcasm. Like how to
For
use
sure.
sarcasm. You've
Yeah.
developed it. And while I think it's great that kids are going to learn how to develop sarcasm, be able to tell a good joke one day, it is not super important for you as a counselor to be using that as one of your methods of operation in the cabin for getting campers to
Right.
do what they need to do, especially with younger campers. Like your
Totally.
5 to even probably 12-year-olds are not picking up what you're putting down, and it's real fun watching like an 11, 12, 13-year-old try to use sarcasm for the first time. But also you see how they misstep all the time when using it. And it's because they're trying to emulate something that they've seen someone who is a role model to them practicing, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
they have a very sarcastic home or they have a sarcastic counselor or older sibling. This is something that you need to make sure that you're watching because it's not our job, because that can come off as inappropriate, rude, insensitive, and all of kind of those categories from above. So those are some of the things that I say you can just do right from the get-go, right from the start, to make sure that your cabin is going to have a much more cohesive language in the group. So those are my
Yeah.
main points right there for kind of some pre-stuff. And I know, Matt, you've definitely got some tools for them to use.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Oliver, I don't think we could count how many times we've said on the podcast that like your example that you set is like I would say 40 to 75% of what is going to help in most behavior. And Travis Allison or Travis from Go Camp Pro here, he lives by the philosophy IAAT, right? I am always teaching. In everything that we do, the way we talk about our time off, the way we talk about our fellow staff members, kids are picking up on that and will follow that example because you are the leader and you set the tone, right? So you have to be aware of that. So I think there's two kind of concrete tools that I'll give here. And one is just, making sure that, especially through for the start of your time at camp together, is like leading the conversations in those like quiet moments. And whether like you have a set of cards that have some good get to know you questions on there, you're doing some like games and activities as you're leading up to bedtime, and you're being very present in those times, because then you're just more exposure to setting the tone and setting the culture. And for different camps and different age groups and whatnot, that changes, of course. But again, remembering that you setting the tone right off the start is going to be important. And Oliver mentioned a contract. So I actually want to break down, it's called a full value contract. And this is like night one in an overnight camp setting, night one, day camp, day one, it's whatever. You're doing this quite early in the experience. So I'll put a link in the show notes to an article kind of about it that breaks it down, but I'll give it to you in about 2 minutes here. So a full value contract is a group exercise on setting the behavioral expectations for your group while you're at camp. We always talk about, we're a community where we come from different communities, right? What planet do we live on? I do this with younger kids. What planet are we on? Oh, the Earth. What country are we in? Oh, we're in Canada. What city are we in right now? No one knows what city their camp is in, so you get to say that. What cabin are we in? And we're like, okay, so we're part of this community here together. And hopefully by this point, you've already talked about how great camp is going to be, what the activities kids are excited about, all that has kind of happened. And, as a counselor, I say, okay, so we all agree that we want to have a good time at camp. No one's here to have a bad time at camp, right? Right. So what we want to do is, while we're hanging out together this week, we need to talk about the things that we need to do to help us have the best time ever at camp. And I think sometimes people can approach this exercise and be full of this is what we aren't going to do as a cabin. But I think starting from that positive mindset of like, hey, we're all on the same team of like, team, let's have a good time at camp. So what do we need to do to maintain that goal? So I first focus on the positive things. I say, what are the things that we should say to each other to help us have the best time at camp? What are the things we should do when it comes to each other to help us have the best time at camp? And you might need to, depending on the age group, there's some prompts in there. Like, what do we need to do when it comes to the cabin? And then let the kids come to the example of like, we need to keep it clean. We need to respect each other's property. And the saying things, what do we need to say to each other? We need to be encouraging. And kids will inevitably go to the negative. They'll say like, no, like respect each other. And then you ask the question, well, what does that look like when we're talking to each other? What does that look like when we're interacting with each other? So 2 things. One, it's okay for them to eventually say like, don't swear. Okay, sure. That's great. I agree. Let's not swear as a cabin. But if they just say like teamwork, it's the classic debriefing problem when you're like doing a team building activity, like, what did we do good today? They go, we communicated. And I always say, okay, totally. What did that look like? What does that actually look like? Or I'm having a hard time, picturing that in action. Can you give me some more? And then as they're answering, you write this on a big piece of paper. So a big poster size piece of paper, and you write these things down. And what we say to the group is, okay, everyone is going to sign this piece of paper, right? And when we sign this paper, it is a contract. This is how we are going to operate together as a cabin. And that gives a bit of structure to this conversation. And it's something you can go back to, because if and when kids slip up and they break something that's on that contract, then you go back to it and you say, hey, just remember this is on the contract. We talked about this. Do you still agree to this? Because if not, then we got to go back to the contract. Everyone's got to come back to the table. We got to talk about it again. Which is like punishment enough sometimes that they have to like stop and go back to this like administrative task rather than being at camp, but you're holding that boundary. The one thing I missed is that, so they've talked about what they should say, what they should do. They're going to say what they shouldn't and shouldn't say and shouldn't do inevitably. And then just make sure you have covered things like, being inclusive, that we say things that lift people up, not tear people down. Like you have those major things, and it's totally okay for you to add to the conversation in there if the kids don't do it organically. So make sure it's okay for you to put your thumb on the scale, if you know what I mean, when it comes to writing that contract. But that will set you up for success from the start. Is it going to help all the time? It will help some of the time, but we also need to give folks out there, Oliver, some strategies for when it inevitably does happen. For over 100 years, summer camp has been an integral part of the AM Skyer world. Today, AM Skyer is a strategic partner for summer camps across the country, building personal relationships and providing valuable resources to their clients and friends. Every day, AM Skyer is proud to support camps and help make them safer. AM Skyer was founded by Abe Skyer in 1920 and is now in the third generation of Skyer family leadership. Henry, Jeffrey, Amy, and the experienced AM Skyer staff eat, sleep, and breathe summer camps, in addition to fostering partnerships with camps that last for decades. Give AM Skyer the opportunity to find solutions for your most challenging insurance needs. They go above and beyond. Learn more at amskyer.com.
Yeah, that's kind of the next stage we're going into. I think Equipto is probably one of the most important things you can do, right? Like, there's going to be that moment of learning when somebody says something they shouldn't, and you're going to go about shutting it down. Like, experience is a great lesson. But this whole last section of our conversation has been about how do you stop it from happening in the first place, which is really important. And just note that there are so many more ways. Like, we're giving you a contract right now, but when you're approaching an activity, right? And you're introducing like, hey, we're going to be climbing the rock wall. These are some things, the safety I want to see. It is not hard for you to also input a section of your debrief that is like, hey, you guys, how do we praise someone who's climbing up the wall? What do we tell a friend who might be a little bit scared to climb this wall today, right? You are
Yeah.
going to give them the lines that they can then use when they see a friend or somebody else who might be scared. And they also know the environment you're creating when you enter that activity of, oh, we're here to encourage somebody else. We're not here to be impatient because it's not our turn yet. We're not here to be competitive over who can get to the top of the wall or who can't, right?
Mhm.
You're saying like, hey, if someone's gonna coming up there, what kind of goals do we want to ask them that they might want to achieve, right? What do we say to a friend who might not reach their goals? What do we say to somebody who might be a little bit scared? You can equip them with that language, especially with younger campers, before you start the activities, before you move into this world, right? Hey, we're going into campfire, not technically language, but are we going to sing along? Are we going to buy in? Are we going to clap for other people? It's body language is also a form of communication, and you'll notice that when Matt and I are talking about this, we are not talking about like, hey, we don't say these things or these are the behaviors that we don't want to see. We're giving kids the knowledge of what they can or say or do in order to give them a better toolbox for the situations that they're going to go into. And that's really important. But as Matt was alluding, in our next section, we're going to talk about what happens when they use the language that we don't want to see them. So the first off is kind of categorizing it. What was said? How was it said? It is important for you as a counselor to kind of figure that out. For me, when you get that thing that is kind of super inappropriate right off the bat, like maybe the camper does swear, or maybe they say something that is inappropriate, it is important for you to be immediate about it. Do not shake it off. Do not have kind of like what did they say? I'm not sure. I don't know if I heard it properly, right? You need to be immediate and direct with it. And I don't mind if you use a different tone of voice, right? Like you should switch to the counselor voice and be like, I don't think I like what I just heard. And like that, notice how there was that pause for effect right there. You're letting
Yeah.
them register, oh, he or my counselor is on to me. They know I said something. That pause makes a huge difference. And I really don't mind if you're doing it in front of the group sometimes, not
Yep.
always. It is, we'll talk about that in a second, but it is okay for you to get that audible ooh from the group. Like everyone knows that's not acceptable. My counselor is going to address it. They're not going to allow that to exist in our culture. So,
Mhm.
the second time this happens, I think this is a good way to go about it doing it because it's going to address it really quickly and directly. But like, if this continues to happen, it's going to be a conversation off to the side. It's hey, we need to talk about this because this is, the first time is like something slipped, but the second, third, fourth time, now we're in a category where this is habitual. You've done this a couple of times. We don't want to see this. We don't want to hear this kind of stuff. How do we address it? And I think Matt's answer for this is going to go a little more into detail with that. So hold off on it for a second. The other one is sometimes there is bullying, right? That means there's multiple parties that are involved. Sometimes somebody may say something that's inappropriate that might be not directed towards somebody, but it might be someone in the group is affected by it. So understand that there is somebody, and I don't want to use the word victim because it might not be directed towards them, but the person who's spoken about in this category means that you got to separate them, right? You got to pull one person aside here, one person aside there. You're going to have separate conversations. And I do believe in consolidating those two people back together and addressing like, hey, what you said hurt this other person. I've heard some people don't really like how would you feel if that happened to you? I'm not completely against it. I think there's a time and a place for it. But I do think that using that line sometimes does help develop empathy and an understanding of like, oh, if somebody had said something about that, it might have hurt me as well. But it's not always a time and place kind of thing to do. And understanding that, not every kid has fully developed empathy. Like we've talked about kids go through growth and development. There are some points in time where they don't truly understand. They haven't gotten to that level yet. And it is our job to help them get there. But, it's a scaffolding of emotional learning and we need to understand that. And then kind of one of the more situations that we address all the time, like as a counselor, you'll have to address all the time is what happens with the he said, she said. He said, she said. It's they are over here, they're in the gaga pit and you didn't hear what somebody said, or, they're playing soccer and you're on one side of the field and then all of a sudden your goalie from behind you comes running up and goes, so-and-so said this to me. And you're like, what, huh? What are you talking about? And all of a sudden you're handling a situation that you didn't hear what was said. You don't know what they said. And I think that it's really important for you to understand it is important still to address it, right? You have to take it just as seriously as if you did hear it yourself. You have to take the honesty of what that camper said. Another camper might deny it. They might not try to admit to it. And then if that's the case, then it's hey, look, I'm not trying to point a finger at you for saying it, but we as a group need to know that it's not an appropriate type of conversation for a group to be talking about, and I want to put a stop to it to make sure that we're not going to move forward. And those types of things you can still do as a counselor for moving forward. Then I do think that for certain degrees, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, you are moving up the ladder, right? Like if a certain thing was said, you're going to be going to your coordinator, director, and eventually it might be something that goes to a parent. So, and if you are shutting something down as a counselor, it is important to understand that you are allowed to address that without feeling as though you are the bad guy, right? A lot of the times, because
Yeah.
it is just words that were said, it might not feel as though it's as big as if somebody was to get hurt or to be injured, or like they feel, because words float, right? Pain doesn't. It's really easy to feel like, oh, I'm being the bad guy now. But it's important that you understand you're creating a culture. The things that are talked about, the things that are shared, it is something that you are attempting to control and move in a certain direction. And you're not being a bad guy by addressing those things. So a lot of times as a counselor, it might be really easy to be like, hey, like, let's not talk that way. And you take this very soft approach and you kind of allow it to graze over. And to a child, that might mean that you're not taking it as seriously as something that should be addressed. So I just want you to know, like, you are not a bad guy for addressing language that is inappropriate to the culture of what's going on, and don't feel bad crossing that hill. So that's some of my advice for when you have a camper who says something that is inappropriate or insensitive. But I think most important, it's addressing it. It's making sure that you're not letting it go to the wayside.
Mhm. I think that's super smart, Oliver. And it reminded me that like when you're intervening in these situations, I think it's important. Campers sometimes will just shut down and be like, "Oh, I'm in trouble." And that translates to I'm a bad person. And then they don't focus on the specific action. So I think you have this really unique opportunity. You're the camp counselor. You're not sending them home. Like you're for the most part, you're not making like big decisions about what's going to happen because they've said these things, and sometimes it's not even one of those big things. So I think it's remembering that like we want campers your relationship going forward is really important with this camper. So we want to make sure that they understand that through like I think you're right, Oliver, be serious, full stop activities to like address it, but you want to come away from that conversation with the camper that they've understood that what they're doing is wrong and that they can't do that in this community, but that you still care about them. You want them to be successful. You want them to be a part of this community, and you need to help them realize that it actually doesn't help them be a part of that community. Because at the end of the day, like, they're putting themselves out farther, or they're ostracizing themselves from the group by saying these things. Or, and you don't need to say this as a counselor, but they're going to have to go home if they continue some of these, especially the more spicy inappropriateness that they could. So what I want to do is give a bit of a framework for the three different scenarios. And Oliver, you set this up really well. You said, like, either you hear it, or you think you heard it, or you're hearing it third hand or second hand from somebody. So I'm going to give you kind of a framework that you can go off of. And first of all, this is going to take practice. I highly suggest during staff training, or you get together with another camp person or someone you're friends with, and just practice what it sounds like to switch to that camp counselor tone and to say something like, "That's not okay. We don't use that type of language here." And like, I tripped over it right there. "That's not okay. We don't use that type of language here. That's not okay. We don't use that type of language here." I'm not forcing them to apologize. I'm not forcing them to repeat themselves, but I'm addressing it in that moment. Okay. So let's talk about, like, if you hear it, the best case scenario, you hear it, you know for sure it was said. This is generally how I want counselors to handle it. So full stop. That's not okay. We don't use that type of language here. Then I'm going to go to the person it was said to first. Right? I'm going to make sure, like, I'm assuming they're not fighting at this point. They're not like scrapping with each other. It was a hurtful comment. The activity's kind of stopped. I've addressed it. You might know whether they can continue the activity at this point. Maybe they can't. Maybe you're just getting everyone to hang out while you address this. I'm going to the person it was said to first, and I'm letting them know, like, "Hey, that was said. That's not okay." If it was directed towards somebody, right? Sometimes it's just a flippant comment and you can kind of move on or talk to the person who said it. But I always go to the person who it was said to first and just asking them, "Hey, do you need anything from me? Do you need to go take a walk? Do you need to go grab some water?" Making sure that I'm offering that to them and they know that I'm taking it seriously. Then I'm going and directly saying it, addressing it. I'm trying not to, like, put them out, and I'm not saying this out loud in front of the whole group. I'm going to say, "Hey," I'm going to ask another counselor to, like, "Hey, can you hang out with the group? I got to have this conversation." I'm pulling the person aside and I'm just being clear. "Hey, this is what I heard, and that's not okay that we use this type of language at camp. Can you, like, tell me more about, like, what happened? What led to that moment?" And you're giving the camper full space to they are going to do a bunch of different things. They might deny that they said it. They might try to say that somebody else said it, like, "Oh, they said it first, so this is why I said it." And this is the hard part, is that you have to hear them, tell them that you hear them, be like, "Okay, so you're saying that this happened and that led to you saying it." And you say, "Hey, you know what? I hear where you're coming from. And at the end of the day, you can't say that. You can't treat people like that. And if you're feeling like were, like, hurt or wronged or whatever, I'm going to address that too. Because the way we treat each other at camp is really important to me, but I need you to know that it's not okay." And depending on how serious it is, I think you can say to the camper, like, I'm going to talk to our head counselor about this. I'm going to give them the context of why it happened. And I want you to be, heard in this too. But, like, that is not okay. And we've talked about that. Okay. So that is, like, if someone says something pretty spicy, that's how you can go for it. If you know,
I think
if you
something
don't,
too.
oh yeah, go.
I think something too that I'll use in that language is a lot of times it's really easy to say that's not something like you can say, right? You're putting onus on that person for what they said. A lot of times I'll
Yeah.
also include myself as, like, "Hey, that's not something we say." And I'm including myself as part of this community that they are a part
Right.
of, that is letting them know that, hey, like, we as an organization, as a group, as us, we don't do that. And I think that's sometimes really important, because a lot of times when you're addressing this, the kid who attacked and said something that was inappropriate or did something that was inappropriate, right? They feel as though they're getting excommunicated the group because they didn't know what the culture was at the time that they said it. Like, now they feel like they're getting pushed out, they're getting accused of something. So it's important for them to understand that, no, you're still part of our community. You made a mistake, and we're here to address that because we can't say those things. We are not going to have that world around us, and you're part of that. So I think that's a really important thing too when you're addressing these types of things with kids, because they see you as this big counselor who now they're scared that they're going to not be a part of the group anymore. And if they Matt has done a great job of talking about how insecurity of people who are bullying or say things that are inappropriate in these natures are doing it because they're trying to engage or feel powerful or feel part of the group, and that might be the reason why they're moving forward with these things. And you need to make sure that they understand, like, no, you're still part of this group. It's just you need to modify what you're saying so that you're not going to make people excommunicate you from this group or make you not part of this group because it's inappropriate. Not that you're trying to put the fear of them that they're going to get kicked out, but you need to let them know, like, hey, you're part of us still. You're still with us.
Yeah. For sure. So scenario number 2, you think you've heard it, but you're not sure. This happens all the time. Camp is chaotic and you're not 100% sure. And this isn't that someone has reported it to you. This is just like you think you overhear it. I still think it's okay to like interrupt what's going on and pull a camper aside. You can say, hey, Tabitha, can I talk to you for a second? Come on over here, keep the activity going, or depending on, use your best judgment in that case. And then you can say, hey, I think I heard something pretty concerning here. Am I right that that's what I heard, or am I wrong there? And I think, 9 times out of 10, the kid is going to say that they didn't say it, and fine, they don't want to get in trouble, or maybe they actually didn't. I very much reserve the right to be wrong in that situation. And I say to them, hey, just to be clear, if that is what you said, that's not okay, right? It's not okay because of this, and reinforcing that boundary and be like, is there anything else I need to know? Did something happen here? Again, you're giving them the chance to say their feelings, and you can validate them, but you can still set the boundary. That's not okay. And then in that case, I might go, if it was maybe directed at a person, that's when I might talk to them and see if they're okay. But then you're not like bringing the hammer down for something that you're not sure if it's happened. If you find out that it did, then go back to what I said before, and you're going to report it, and you'll treat it more seriously. But that way you're still like showing that you're being like a lifeguard in that situation, right? You're still looking out for the group. And I think that will bring some assurance to the whole group who may not be cool with what was just said. Okay. That's scenario number 2. Scenario number 3 is what will happen often is you hear it secondhand. A kid, maybe it's like free time, and a kid comes and tells you that this person said this thing, right? And it's not okay. And you can't just leave it at that moment, right? It's easy to be like, well, go play. And if it happens again, come talk to me. No, not acceptable. So you need to do some initial investigating, right? So if it was said towards a person, I'm not going to interrupt an activity that's going on because you don't want it to become a bigger thing, but I'm going to go to the person that it was maybe said to first and just check in with them. Be like, hey, I heard this happen. Are you doing okay? And the person might say, oh, I didn't hear it at all. And like, you're like, oh, okay. So I might go back to that person, the person who reported it to me, and be like, hey, I didn't hear anything. Is this the right person to talk to? Is there anyone else I should ask? And then making sure I'm just like getting a full story from a bunch of other people before I go to the person who might have said that thing. Right. And then I'm going to go to the camper who might have said that thing that they're being accused of. And I might just have that same curious conversation. Hey, I heard from a couple people that this happened. Can you tell me more? Is that what you said? If they deny it, you can lean in and say, I've heard this from a couple of people. Do you want to maybe give me that answer? Do you want to change your answer? And they might deny. And you say, okay, well, I want to set the boundary. This cannot happen. And I'm going to be talking to the other staff and making sure that they know that they're watching out for this. So please make sure that you are not saying these things. And sometimes that's as far as it needs to go. If they admit that what they said, then yeah, go down the path of having that conversation, reinforcing the boundary, validating where it came from. And ultimately, depending on how serious it is and what your camp says they need to do, report it. And that is, again, we're not talking about what the next steps for all of this are. There's a whole couple podcasts about how we like restore relationships between kids who have had issues, or different ways that you can like manage conflict. There's a ton of great stuff that we're going to talk about this season, but I really think those are the first steps that you take, whether you heard it directly, think you heard it, or you hear it secondhand. Oliver, what did I miss?
No, I think you did a great job. I think at the end of the day, when we're looking at this, it's like what I said before is words float, right? They're invisible, they disappear. And if you don't address them quickly and efficiently and the moment that they happen, then all of a sudden you're getting back to the cabin at night, right? And what was said is forgotten by you. It's forgotten probably by the person who said it, but it's not going to be forgotten by the people who are affected by it, right? Those people, that's where the words stick to. And they're going to be the ones who are going to bed that night wondering about, oh man, like, I can't believe they said that. Is that real? Is that something I have to handle? Is that something I have to think about? No matter what category it was in, because if it's inappropriate and sexual, they might be wondering like, oh, like, should I be sexually active? And like, no, nope, you are not. That is not something that you should be thinking about, right? Or, it's bullying and it's like, oh, somebody said something that hurt me. Am I really fat? Am I really stupid? Am I really what they said about me? Or is it something super insensitive? Those non-negotiable things. Was it racist or something hurtful in that manner? Is like, oh, are my people supposed to be that way? Like, am I part of that world? The kid who had that said, or the person who's in that group where those words were said, it sticks to them, right? And they are
Yeah.
going to remember those things. Whereas with the person who might have said it's going to wash away, right? They said it because it was acceptable to them. They can move on. But like I said, words float, they disappear. And if you don't address it in that moment, then you're not going to be able to catch them. Like a balloon with helium, you got to grab the string before it gets away. So make sure that you address that language as soon as you can. And that's, I think, really what a big part of the core today's lesson was. It's like, we're going to equip you with some things on how to address it, on how to catch that balloon, but you really do need to make sure you catch it and address it and go from there. So I think that's a great show for us today. And obviously, like we talked about, this could be a part 2, 3, 4, 5, like everything we talk about. Matt and I could sit here for 12 hours talking about. But if somebody really does want to listen to Matt and I talk for 12 hours, you can either A, just listen to multiple shows, or B, just reach out to us, because we'll probably never shut up if you ask us a couple camp questions. But we do want to end the show with something that you can use and take away. So an EGGLE, an ever growing, ever learning. It's a theme of the show. We put them at the end. It's a trick, a tip, a game, or a song for counselors to use to be better every single day. And mine is really simple. I love getting them. Actually, I have a stack on my desk right now that I'm going through because, sometimes in camp, you can't get to read them all at the same time because you're busy with stuff. So, you get a few. But Camping Magazine with the ACA, American Camp Association, they come out with these camping magazines that have articles in them of best practices, things that are coming up, things that you notice. It's from some of the smartest people in the camping world. You can sign up on the ACA website to have them sent to your home or to your camp so you can get them. You can also ask your camp director to read it whenever they come in. And then also, I do believe that they have free digital copies that are online that you can go to and get a look. And I think they're really great because they do a couple of things. One is they give you the information, but I think if you're a growing camp leader, there's all different levels of what those conversations are about or what those articles are about. So it might be something that pertains to you at a counselor level that is really cool for you to read about. And that can be addressed in a lot of different levels of camp management. But then also, I think it's giving you an insight on if you do become a camp director or a leader in camp, some things that you need to think about as a leader. So, what's that? If it's college classes, it's the 101s, but it's the 401 and the 601s and it's just great. And also you get to see the insight of some really great camping professionals who write those articles and put that. You get an idea of what's pacing through the camp industry as a whole. So highly suggest them. I love reading them and I always look forward to receiving them. And they're like my little present in the mail now. Like, oh, so that's my EGGLE.
If you're the type of camp dork that listens to this podcast, then you will definitely like the Camping Magazine subscription.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll make sure that the link to subscribe and to check it out is in the show notes. My EGGLE is a practical one, and we're recording this in October. This will come out end of October probably. And you are likely going to be interviewing for your next camp job soon. So one, I would go back to our episode about how to ace your next camp interview. That was a one full of lots of great tips, but this is a practical one, and it is your webcam setup. Make sure, I think I might have given this as an EGGLE, but a specific tool is the webcam that you're using. So I recommend that in some sort of your setup, that your webcam is one that you are looking at eye level. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see my example, and I try to keep a good Zoom background here, but specifically, I have a webcam, and maybe I'll try to post a picture of it for the show notes, that dangles actually down over my monitor. So if you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to point my finger right towards the lens, and it goes right square. So it's actually in the middle of my screen right now. I have my show notes, I have Oliver's picture right there, so that it looks like I'm making eye contact with you, even if I'm looking slightly off the side at my show notes or at Oliver's beautiful face here. So I'm using what's called the center cam. It's a little expensive. For me, it's been well worth it. But any way you can get your webcam into a way that you are looking at it by default, I think I've suggested in the past to put like a little sticky note with an arrow pointing at the camera, even if it's on top of your laptop screen. Then you raise your laptop up a little bit so it's at eye level. But remember to look at the camera, because then it feels like to the viewer that you're making eye contact with them. So check out the center cam in the show notes, or just, fix your gosh darn webcam placement.
Yeah, I'm always very subconscious about it because I know Matt pays attention, so I'm always trying to think about what my angle is. I'm usually propped up on some board games or some notebooks and stuff that I've got, just because I know
Oh yeah.
Matt's gonna look at me the whole time and go, he's gotta lift that camera up just a little bit more. I can sink down. I don't know what's my angle. But yeah, and really important. I know we have an episode that is about interviewing properly, so as you're gearing up for that, don't be scared to go back and listen to that episode. Not much has changed. Please, 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 if you are using your phone, prop it up the proper way. Please do not lay down on a couch doing your interview. All
Oh God.
things, yeah, things that I've seen as a camp director and instantly just go, probably not the person I'm hiring today. But with that being said, thank you so much for joining us today and learning about how to handle some inappropriate language at camp. If you enjoyed today's show, we would be so grateful if you would leave us a review wherever you're listening to this podcast. Your ratings and reviews not only help us know what you like or don't like about the show, but it helps boost our rankings and helps more people discover some of the awesome things we're talking about.
And also, don't forget, you can find all of our show notes at gocamp.pro FCC. Sorry, gocamp.pro/FCC. There's lots of great stuff there. The links to what we talked about in this episode. And email us if you want to be on the show. If there's a topic that we should be talking about, please email me, Matt, M-A-T-T, at gocamp.pro. My contact info and Oliver's will be in the show notes too, but we'd love to talk to you. So thanks for another great episode, Oliver. It was a good one.
Yeah, no, enjoyable as always. And remember, camp is camp, and camp is all good. Thanks for listening, friends.
First Class Counselors is brought to you by Beth and Travis Allison, Summer Camp Leadership Training and Marketing Consultants. Thanks for listening, friends.
Hey Camp Pros, we love that our industry is built on sharing. In order to foster that spirit, we hope that whenever you share an idea that you learned from the Camp Hacker podcast, conference, summer camp professionals group, or wherever else, that you're quick to give credit where credit is due. That way, we can all encourage more Camp Pros to share the tips and tricks that will make camp better.